This is Nelson Moss. He works as an advertiser in a local company. Every day he wakes up and works as if there's no tomorrow for him. Basically, he is a workaholic. This is Angelica, his girlfriend, who he barely gives any time to. She desperately wants him to take a break for a while and spend some quality time with her, but you know some people are just stubborn. Nelson travels to work in his expensive car and meets his friend, who also scolds him for worrying too much about work. After showing his recent project to his friend, Nelson walks outside to make sure everyone is doing their work and giving them quality feedback. Suddenly, his assistant comes and reminds him to do his license examination, otherwise his license will suspend the following day. Nelson is left with no choice and attends the exam along with a bunch of other people. A strange woman, whose name is Sara Deever, comes inside the exam room while carrying a bunch of groceries in her hands. It looked as if she came here right after shopping, which catches everyone's eye. Sara might be a bit messy at times, but unlike Nelson, she is optimistic. She is open to life and enjoys it rather than just competing. However, her behavior in nature is also a bit childish at times. She begins to take her examination, and since Nelson did not prepare his examination, he asks for Sara's help. Unfortunately, the examiner catches them red-handed for talking. Instead of punishing Nelson for his mistake, he punishes Sara and rips apart her exam papers, telling her to come back in 30 days. Sara leaves the exam room after saying good luck to Nelson, who was barely showing any sign of remorse. After finishing his exam, he walks outside and finds the same woman sitting on his car. He suggests for her to call his secretary to figure things out and offers her some cash upfront, but she denies taking it, not caring much about the cash. The same week, while he was exercising, the same woman arrives at his location and asks for him to come downstairs in some sarcastic and cheesy way. Sara accuses him of being self-centered and asks for a ride since he was the reason she could not take her exam. Upon him denying her request, she starts to make a scene and Nelson has no choice but to avoid further confrontation by giving her a ride. Inside the car, she introduces herself and gives him directions to Oakland, which was a bit of a distance from their current location. Upon reaching her destination, Sara puts on a wig and breaks into a building. About a minute later, a loud alarm can be heard. She comes out with a bag that looks to be full of cash, but in reality it contains two little puppies who she reveals she rescued from experimentation. Sara suggests that Nelson barely has any fun in his life, but all this was taking a toll on Nelson. Upon reaching her place, she insists on him coming inside her apartment just for a cup of coffee, but Nelson was too pissed. She threatens to call him the next day as well because he does not want to come inside that night. Seeing this, he agrees to come in and walks along with her. After putting pups in a safe place, she makes some coffee and offers Nelson some help regarding his lack of intimacy skills. He makes fun of her, but she still insists on helping him only if he commits to spend a month inside her house without working at all. However, Nelson states that he has a girlfriend and leaves on the spot, denying her offer. The next day, we can see him giving a presentation for advertisement for his new clients, which looks pretty funny. The idea of this advertisement was disliked by the clients and they nervously say no to the offer. Things then begin to heat up between Nelson and the client when Nelson calls his products trash. Later on, Nelson's boss starts to accuse him for his bad decisions and calls him a liability. When Nelson does not take a vacation as suggested by his boss, he ends up getting fired from his job. Upon his arrival to his house, he also encounters his girlfriend leaving him as well. The following day, Nelson starts to drink a lot when suddenly he hears a knock on the door. It was a delivery containing the small puppies Sara rescued a while ago. Nelson arrives at Sara's apartment to return the dog, to which she was pretty excited. She also takes a look at an injury Nelson received while he was drinking. Sara starts to take care of his wound, where he reveals about his hopeless situation. Sara reminds him of the offer to live with her during the month of November. She slowly takes his shirt off and leaves him stunned. He thinks it over to himself, deciding to stay for just one night. Then he walks over to Sara and slowly start to kiss her. Things then start to unfold between them. Things were heating up between them when suddenly Sara suggests for him to go slow, which caused Nelson to get angry and he starts to walk away with Sara following him from behind. In the stormy weather, an argument ensues between them where Nelson doesn't understand the reason she was helping him. However, things finally settle down between them. We can see Nelson and Sara having a romantic moment, but slower this time. Next morning, Nelson wakes up and calls his friend after wearing a colorful shirt. However, seeing Nelson doing the same daily routine, Sara cuts off the call and gives him some new type of clothes to wear. After a while, her neighbor called Chaz walks inside the house to meet her and acts as if something is going on between Sara and himself. Nelson then leaves the house in order to find a new job, and on their way he finds a beggar wearing his old clothes, which Sara gave away for free. She tries to convince him to come back and spend time with her. However, Nelson is stubborn about his career and acts as usual, which makes her mad. causing her to leave. Seeing this, Nelson apologizes to her and gives her just a day to spend together. They then start to do various things. Nelson was curious about Sara being so excited about such little things. Later, he asks her for the reason to her way of living, to which Sara explains she used to own a pet store, but she quit since it was not fun for her anymore. The following day, back at Sara's house, Sara puts a blindfold on Nelson's eyes and they start to play the game, where Nelson even falls several times. He then reminds her that he will be leaving the same night. The same evening, both were enjoying a nice dinner and Sara reveals how she's done the same thing that she's doing with him, with other men, helping them by having them stay with her for 1 month. Nelson was back at it. He was doing everything as she suggested, which was following his boring schedule. He checks Sara's website and finds out she was indeed telling the truth. Nelson could not resist coming back to her and gives her a kiss. We can see them traveling in a local train where she tells him to follow all the rules told by her, including traveling by train. He later talks to his friend, where he's asked about the girl he was spending so much time with, but Nelson does not reveal much about Sara. They later meet a kid called Abner, whose relation with Sara will be revealed later on. However, Sara and Nelson come to support Abner in a robot boat race. Meanwhile, to help Abner win, Nelson pays a man with a toy submarine who takes care of everything, and finally Abner wins the race, which makes his day. They then leave Abner at his house. At night, they were talking about their life. Nelson reveals about his father, who sold vacuum cleaners and life insurance door to door. Every night, he would lock himself into his room and listen to old music. Sara believes one day she will hear him sing. We are moved to a scene next morning at lunchtime where Nelson's friend comes and sees Sara along with Nelson. Sara doubts if he will help Nelson in emergency situations. We can see them reaching a house. This is Nelson's house, where they even dance a little. Days pass by. Nelson and Sara were spending their time and looking like the happiest couple ever. One day they were bathing together. Suddenly, Sara's neighbor comes in without knocking on the door and pisses Nelson a bit. He invites both of them to dinner at 8:30 in the evening. They later get ready for the night. Upon arriving at the house, the reality of her neighbor is revealed to be something no one could imagine. The man was actually a lady man, explains the reason for Sara to be so comfortable with him. While sitting on the table, Nelson felt a bit distracted. He can be seen trying to find something to watch on the TV, where her neighbors also tries to talk to him. It is finally revealed that this lady man is Chaz, a competitor advertiser about whom Nelson did not like to hear. Suddenly, a phone call arrives and Sara picks up the call, which makes her utterly upset and she flees from the spot. Chaz knew about it, but did not want to reveal anything to Nelson about it, since it was a long story. Nelson arrives back at her apartment and asks about the reason she got upset. She tries to ignore the question and kisses him to have romantic moments, but Nelson suspects that she wasn't feeling well and decides to postpone the obvious. Next morning, he was ready to attend a meeting with Edger, owner of a big firm, where he was perhaps attending an interview for a new job. However, Sara was not happy about it, since her month's deal with Nelson was still going on. The boss gives him an offer, but the waitress somehow makes a mistake and gets scolded by the boss verbally, which indeed makes her cry. This was disliked by Nelson, so even though getting offered a huge chunk of money, he refuses to work with him. He finally comes to Sara with a tons of flowers and reveals the whole scenario, and they can be seen in Sara's bed sleeping. Later on, she finally reveals how she was not going to invite her family on Thanksgiving due to some unknown reason. Suddenly, someone rings the bell and we see Nelson giving away one of the pups, suggesting someone adopted them. The little guy called Edner is revealed to be Sara's neighbor, who suggests Nelson to adopt himself. As expected, he denies. However, he will come on the father-son day. He looks at Sara's apartment and realizes something. He walks in her apartment. Meanwhile, Sara looked as if she was really sick and hiding something from Nelson. Nelson finally revealed the words every girl dreams of. He asks her if she will marry him and even puts his cell phone and watch inside the water to convince her that he has changed. To which, Sara locked herself and Nelson breaks the door and finds out her condition was something he could have never imagined. After losing her mind, Sara faints on the floor and we are moved to another scene where Sara is admitted in the hospital. Chaz explains how she stopped her treatment a year ago and the thing spread everywhere. Chaz suggests that he is the only guy that she really liked who lasted more than a month. Sara was making the most of her life while it will last, says Chaz. Nelson walks in the hospital and takes her back into her apartment, where she tells him to go away while she was taking a bath with the help of her neighbors. The small kid Edner comes in as well, and Nelson ends up joining his speech in his school. Being devastated, he travels back to his house and recalls all those moments he has spent with Sara. We are moved to the scene where Chaz is helping Sara get the food ready for Thanksgiving, where they talk about Nelson. She explains loves him, but for his own good, she did not want to see him again. She was afraid it was going to hurt him, but Chaz thinks the opposite and suggests her to see Nelson. On Thanksgiving Day, Nelson arrives at Sara's house through her window and shouts Merry Christmas and surprise her whole family. They leave for them to spend time alone, where Nelson has come up with various type of gifts for Sara, which were funny and something Sara would love to have and makes her laugh. In the end, he gives her the best gift ever, which was the small pup they gave away for adoption. Nelson later on sings a special song for Sara, which makes her smile. Finally, Nelson takes Sara to his own place, where he has bought all the calendars, which were the month of November. He tells her that he loves her a lot and nothing can change that. Later, they even make lots of love and spend the night together. Next morning, Sara wakes up early and decides to flee from her apartment so that he can take away all his belongings and move out. But Nelson tells her that she is the only person he wants in his life, while Sara insisted him to go away and spend his life with another great woman. It was clear Sara was deeply in love with him and wanted the best for him. They later kiss each other while saying they love each other. Sara puts a blindfold on Nelson's eyes, then slowly walks away from Nelson and looks back at him. He looks for her, but she has long gone and he walks away after smelling her scarf. We can see Nelson walking away and the movie ends here, suggesting Sara is no more.